Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays, hosted by someone's favorite film buff, Nathan. I love movies and I want to share that with you. From old originals to cult classics and foreign favorites, along with straight up drivel, WWW is your place for all things movies. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Wednesdays, the show where we talk about 3 movies all in the same night. And for tonight's episode, we're going to be talking about a trilogy that I did not exactly plan to talk about this week, but decided to talk about this week anyways. Isn't that fun? I think it's fun, and we're going to have some fun. So, what exactly are we going to be talking about on tonight's episode that wasn't totally planned for originally? Well, the 3 movies we're taking a look at may not be a perfect trilogy of movies in the sense that they're not exactly part 1, part 2, and part 3, but there is an overall storyline to them and there is an overall order to them, and more importantly, all 3 of the movies we're talking about tonight were written, directed, and edited by the same person, that being the American film director Robert Rodriguez. The 3 movies we're talking about tonight are a part of his Mexico trilogy and include the movies El Mariachi from 1993, Desperado from 1995, and Once Upon a Time in Mexico from 2003. I want to mention that while this isn't a perfect trilogy, it is an overall continuing story. It's kind of like the Fistful of Dollars trilogy, or the Dollars trilogy, you know, the Sergio Leone westerns with Clint Eastwood. It's a spiritual trilogy in the sense that there's a similar character and there's similar actors in all 3 of the movies, but, you know, it's not a perfect 1, 2, 3 story. But with all that being said, I also wanted to mention that I've always wanted to watch El Mariachi, and I'm very excited to talk about El Mariachi. So when we come back from the break, we'll jump into El Mariachi. Stick around. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our first movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at El Mariachi from 1993, available to rent from places such as Amazon, YouTube, and Fandango at home. For the basic plot summary of El Mariachi, we follow a traveling musician who is simply called El Mariachi or The Mariachi, as he is mistaken for an escaped criminal when entering a new town. You see, it's this classic misunderstanding where this guy who doesn't have a name and is just called the Mariachi, who wants to get a job playing as a mariachi player at a bar or, you know, a cafe in town, is accidentally mistaken for an escaped criminal because the description of the escaped criminal is guy with dark clothes that's carrying a guitar case. You know that classic situation of classic misunderstanding? Isn't that just so classic and really, really simple to follow? Yes. Yes. Although I will be facetious just a little bit by throwing in the whole simple descriptor, I will say it is very simple. And that is, by far, one of the biggest strengths of El Mariachi. Let me tell you right now, I have always wanted to watch El Mariachi. I can explain why, but that would take too long. So instead, just kind of summarize it as, I've wanted to watch it because I feel like I'd get very inspired by it, or I would really like it. And I'm very pleased to say that within 15 minutes of starting the movie El Mariachi, I paused and went, I officially love this movie. If that doesn't tell you, I don't know what I was about to say, if that doesn't sell you or tell you, whatever the point is, if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about my opinion of this movie, I don't know what will, but I will still go into my opinion a little bit deeper because we've got more than just a minute here on What to Watch Wednesdays. So let's take more than a minute. Let's start with the most baseline, I suppose, thing to El Mariachi that I like, okay? The first thing that I really like about El Mariachi is the music. Now, because this is following a mariachi singer and a guy who plays guitar, You'd kind of think as a given that they may put some focus on having the music be good, especially the music that he ends up singing. And while the music he does end up singing is great, I'm talking about the background music. In every single scene, I love the background music. I love the music that was composed for the movie. I love the music that is just playing during the high intensity action sequences. I love it when it's during the lower intensity non-action sequences. I love the music just overall as a package. And I'm really annoyed that I couldn't find the soundtrack on any music platforms. That still bothers me. Why can't I find the El Mariachi soundtrack anywhere? I want it. Can I listen to it? Please. Please. But, I mean, good music is one thing. What about all the other aspects of the movie? Let's get into some of those other aspects. Acting. Is the acting good? Yes, the acting is great. I love all of the actors, especially the guy who's playing the main character of the Mariachi, Carlos. Let me check my notes later on here for a second. Carlos Gallardo. I love Carlos. He's great. He really knows how to hold the frame on close-ups. And that's really important in a movie like El Mariachi, where there are a lot of close-ups. But there's also a lot of handheld camera motion. And there's a lot of wide-angle cinematography, and it's very fast-paced. So normally when I bring up those things all in quick succession, it's usually to prove a point that possibly you take on too many of those things all at once, and it might actually collapse in on itself, or I may be bringing those things up to mention that they all work in perfect unison together. In the case of El Mariachi, it's the second point. It's the second case all the way through. All of the wide-angle cinematography, all of the handheld camera motion, all of the wonderful ability of Carlos to hold a close-up, and all of the very fast editing works in perfect unison with the music to create something extremely entertaining. Do you see the points I'm getting to here? I really liked El Mariachi. I adored it. Part of the reason that this movie works is because it is well edited, it is well paced, it is very simple from a storyline perspective, it has great acting, and the music is great. And keep in mind that this movie still feels like a run-and-gun documentary where they've only given the actors one take. I know I haven't mentioned that earlier in this review, but I wanted to mention it now anyways, because we're getting to a final point surrounding El Mariachi that I really want to culminate to. So I'm going to mention it again. El Mariachi, with its quick editing and its handheld camera movements, feels like a one-take, run-and-gun documentary in the best way possible. And part of the reason for that is despite how well put together this movie is, or you may not expect for how well together this movie is. That was a rephrasing that didn't work. Let me try that again. Excuse me, while I make sure my brain is actually working tonight, like it has been for the last few minutes, and retry that. Because this movie is so well put together, and because it works on so many levels, at least in my own opinion, it may surprise you to know that the initial production was $7,000. Robert Rodriguez spent only $7,000 on getting the movie made in the first place. Now, of course, there was a bunch of money spent on marketing by a big production company, and there was money spent to kind of reformat it for big screens and stuff like that. But I'm talking about the initial production, where he spent money on the film and on the camera and on the actors in a way. $7,000. And the editing is still good. The music is still good. The acting is still good. The camera work is still good. Nearly every single element is still good. If that doesn't speak to the power of independent filmmaking, I don't know what does. And like I said, I was hoping to be inspired by El Mariachi. Let me tell you, I am inspired to make a movie. a feature-length movie after watching El Mariachi. I am beyond inspired. And because of that, I would say that it is definitely a must-watch for any film student, myself included. And that's just my opinion, but I believe very strongly in that opinion. That covers all I have to say about El Mariachi for now. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to jump into the sequel, that being Desperado. So stick around for that. 88 won the Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our second movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at Desperado from 1995, available to rent now from places such as Amazon, YouTube, and Fandango at Home. For the basic plot summary of Desperado, we follow the Mariachi from the first movie, El Mariachi, as he must now track down the drug lord, Bucho, in order to get some good old-fashioned revenge on him, because Bucho was partially responsible for the ending of El Mariachi. And I'm not going to spoil the end of El Mariachi because I would highly recommend watching El Mariachi, so we're just going to kind of leave that up to the imagination for now. At any point, at any rate, I should say, Mariachi must now track down Bucho and get some revenge. So that's what he's going to do. Yay! Let's have a round of applause for simplistic plots. I'm not going to give that applause because we don't have time to clap. I don't have time to clap, but if I could, I would. Because let's be honest here. I went on and on about how the simplicity of El Mariachi worked in its favor. And I'll be honest, the simplicity is what works in Desperado's favor as well. But before we get to any of that, we do need to address an interesting sort of change, usually in these kinds of trilogies. For example, the Dollars trilogy by Sergio Leone, that are kind of a spiritual trilogy, but also a, beginning, middle, and end in a way, or they have a sort of continuing story, or they are a continuous sort of episodic storyline. Usually, you'll see the same main character played by the same actor. For example, in the case of the Dollars trilogy, we have Clint Eastwood as the role of the character, the man with no name. Now, when we take a look at Desperado compared to El Mariachi, the most noticeable difference between the two of them is that Mariachi, or El Mariachi, the main character guy, who is just the Mariachi, is played by Antonio Banderas instead of Carlos Gallardo. Carlos Gallardo was the Mariachi in El Mariachi, and now Antonio Banderas is the Mariachi in Desperado. Now, that big change is part of why Desperado takes about 15 minutes for me to get interested in it. I'm actually going to kind of throw it out to about 30 minutes. Now, with the first movie, El Mariachi, it took me 15 minutes before I paused it and went, I love this. With Desperado, it took me 30 minutes before I went, okay, I now love this. And now I'm actually invested. During those first 15 minutes of Desperado, I'm kind of there. And then the next 15 minutes, I'm not there. And then once the 30-minute mark hits, I'm now really there. I hate to keep bringing up timestamps all the time, but it is an important point to mention that there is kind of this awkward sort of transition phase in the beginning of Desperado because you have to get used to Antonio Banderas, or at least I have to get used to Antonio Banderas. But once I get used to him, I really like him. That's the point I'm trying to get across, that just because it took me a second does not mean I dislike his performance at all, does not mean he is worse than Carlos Gallardo, does not mean he is unworthy of being the replacement for the Mariachi. If anything, I am very appreciative of his inclusion in the movie, and if anything, I think he is better than Carlos Gallardo. It just took me a second, I just had to kind of go, oh, this is a bit different than some of these other trilogies I've seen out there, where they keep the repeating cast of characters played by the same actor, So once I got past that little roadblock, I was able to really get into it, and I was able to really start having fun. Part of the reason that this movie is so much fun is the over-stylization. Now, I didn't talk about this too much with El Mariachi, but I'm going to really talk about it here. Let me tell you, when Robert Rodriguez goes all over the place in terms of stylization, he goes all over the place. And when he's doing it right, It is really fun. We're talking gunfights where people look like they're just jerking their hands up and down while shooting. We're talking about people like firing behind their backs while shooting. We're talking about people that just jump backwards while shooting and jump forwards and to the side and to the other side and then spin around. And wait a minute, why am I saying people doing this when it's all the main character played by Antonio Banderas? It's all just the mariachi doing those things. One character doing all of that, and it's so much fun. Oh, it is so much fun. I love the stylization in Desperado. And part of the reason I love the stylization is because just because they're going overboard with the physicality of it and overboard with the way he's shooting doesn't mean they're going overboard with the gore and the violence itself. Now, granted, there is still blood. This is still violence in a movie, you know? There is still some representation of it. But if you compare it to something like, oh, I don't know, a Quentin Tarantino movie, there isn't as much blood. If you compare it to something like a Wes Craven movie, there isn't as much blood. If you compare it to something like another thing out there that I can't think of, I'll put it this way. I'll compare it to what I was expecting there to be. I was expecting there to be a lot more blood in this movie than there actually is, which is actually a really good thing. It's a good thing that it almost focuses more on the stylization rather than the violence itself. It's more about the fun nature of seeing how Antonio Banderas can move his body while shooting a gun rather than seeing the people die from being shot with a gun. Do you see that interesting dissociation there that makes it more interesting to watch or more fun to watch? It's not exactly glorifying the violence, it's glorifying the fact that, hey, look at this, I could do a flip. That's far more fun. And I will admit that while I adore the music in El Mariachi, the music in Desperado is probably better, and it is lined up with the movie in a much better way. Sometimes they even sync up parts of the edit to the music. And with all those crazy gunfight scenes, it almost feels like I'm watching a musical where Antonio Banderas does a bunch of jumping backwards while trying to shoot a gun. What about that does not sound really, really fun? Well, I mean, nothing about that doesn't sound really, really fun. And because of that, the movie is really, really fun. I don't know what else to tell you. I honestly could go on and on about how not just Antonio Banderas, but the main female love interest in this movie, played by Salma Hayek, the two of them have a great chemistry with each other. I could go on and on about how the simplistic dialogue and the simplistic writing of Robert Rodriguez actually works in the favor of portraying the character and the story surrounding the mariachi himself in a much better way than could ever be expected. Or I could just kind of say that that's what happens, and you'd probably believe me because I've already got into detail about the stylization. So you know what? I think I've said plenty about Desperado for now. I could go on and on about it, but we don't have all night, and we do have bigger fish to fry. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to jump into Once Upon a Time in Mexico. Stick around for that. Your Movie Central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our third and final movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at Once Upon a Time in Mexico from 2003, available to rent now from places such as Amazon, YouTube, and Fandango at Home. For the basic plot summary of Once Upon a Time in Mexico, we follow the mariachi from the last two movies, as he is hired by a CIA agent to kill a corrupt general. And it just so happens that this corrupt general is involved in Mariachi's current revenge quest, based on something that happened in between the end of the last movie, Desperado, and the beginning of this movie, Once Upon a Time in Mexico. So how convenient for him. You know what else is convenient? Or should I say, you want to know what isn't convenient, actually? Let's address something right now. That plot summary sounds so very simple, doesn't it? Doesn't it sound really simple? Doesn't it sound just perfectly in line with the other two movies having very simple plot summaries? Well, bad news bears for everybody. Yippee-ki-yay, the plot summary that I just gave you is the simplified version of the actual plot summary, because it's not just that. It turns out that there is supposed to be a gang boss who is hiring the general who's involved in this whole hubbub. There's an ex-CIA official who is also being interacted with by the CIA officer. And as it turns out, Mariachi is hired to kill the general, but the general is being hired by this crime lord to kill the president. And so Mariachi needs to let the corrupt general kill the president, and then Mariachi should kill the general. If it really helps, if you're lost, to imagine my arms getting all crossed up while explaining that plot summary, let me tell you right now, that's exactly what happened, and you should definitely be imagining that, because it's going to help you to understand this. And even then, you're not going to understand it. So it's just going to help you try to wrap your head around the fact that this plot summary even exists in comparison to the other two. Okay, let's conquer this one step at a time. Is this a simple plot? No. Is that to its detriment? Yes. To its detriment is an understatement. I'll be honest here. There is a lot of plot to Once a Time in Mexico, and it did not need to be this convoluted. You could really simplify it down by not having that crime boss be there, not having that ex-FBI officer be there, not having the caveat that Mariachi needs to let the corrupt general kill the president first. And the reason I hesitated there is because I forgot which character I was even going to mention, because I'm actually that confused with this plot because it's just so all over the place. You could have just had it be Mariachi going on a revenge quest to kill a corrupt general. You don't even need the CIA agent to hire him. You could just have it be that. And that would fall in line perfectly with the other two movies. Instead, they pile in all this other stuff to really make it be too much. Let's phrase it with a great analogy that I came up with while watching the movie. You could say that Robert Rodriguez bit off more than he could chew. But that's an understatement. He did not bite off more than he could chew. He went back for seconds before he even sat down. He went back and then piled on the third helping of ice cream from the buffet tray, and then went to the wrong table and sat down across from the other mountain of food left by somebody else. That's what he did, and we're just gonna have to live with it. That's how he made the plot. That's my analogy. And I'm trying so hard not to laugh at it. I'm trying so hard. And it's not working perfectly, so we're gonna move on. You know the biggest issue with Once Upon a Time in Mexico? Weirdly enough, it's not the plot, it's the fact that the music doesn't fit. Think of like overdramatic melodrama that weirdly does have some merit as music itself in a movie, not lining up with the actual tension and or emotion created in the scenes in such a heavily stylized manner. And you get the end result of Once Upon a Time in Mexico. I'm really sad to say that out loud, because after I gushed about the music in El Mariachi and Desperado, you'd think that Rodriguez would know how to match up the music with his movie, but apparently not. Apparently he just unlearned that skill in between the time it took for him to make Desperado and Once Upon a Time in Mexico. It's really, really sad. It's not even frustrating. It's just kind of sad. It's like, wow, this music's great. I wish it lined up. You know what else is I wish was there? The editing being refined like it was with, El Mariachi and Desperado. The sound design and the slow motion being there to be refined alongside that editing, because stylization is definitely dependent on things like slow motion and sound design to be effective. And when you start noticing how sloppy it is, it's really frustrating and really annoying to sit through, or it could just kind of leave you numb inside. I'll be honest here. I have been being honest. But I think part of the big issue with Once Upon a Time in Mexico is that there is a lot of stuff happening. There is so much stuff happening, and none of it is entertaining like the other two movies. There's definitely a lot there, and in comparison to other movies I've seen this year, it is far from boring. But it is definitely the worst out of its trilogy, at least in my opinion, because of how it lacks the ability to be entertaining compared to its predecessors. That's the real core nugget issue at the center of this pie. I don't know why I mentioned nugget and then went pie, but I don't care. I made a good analogy already. Don't force me to make another good one. My brain's gonna explode. It already exploded watching this. And yeah, that's the core nugget. There we go. Yeah. You know what? I think that's all I can really say for now. I want to thank you all for tuning in to What to Watch Wednesdays tonight. I know tonight was a maybe shorter episode than usual, but you know, sometimes the episodes are going to be shorter, sometimes they're going to be longer. Can't perfectly control it, so whatever. Thank you all for tuning in regardless. If you want to follow along with either What to Watch Wednesdays or What to Watch Weekends, please be sure to follow along on Instagram and YouTube at What to Watch Wednesdays, all one word, no caps, no spaces. I will also be back this upcoming Wednesday, or next Wednesday, I should say, from 8 to 9 p.m. for another episode of What to Watch Wednesdays here on 88.1 The Burg, where I'll be telling you all what to watch. Good night, everybody.